Welcome to Meeting the Inconceivable, a podcast exploring Zen koans, dreams, and the creative life produced by Pacific Zen Institute. Pacific Zen has a legacy of preserving and reimagining the koan tradition to meet our own times. With a lively community of artists, innovators, and seekers of all kinds that extends worldwide, our mission is to create a culture of transformation through meditation, koans, the arts, and conversations about the deepest matters. In this episode, Roshi Allison Atwill tells of an old story in the Zhuangzi that became a koan, in which a man dreams he was a butterfly and wakes wondering whether he is a man dreaming himself a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming himself a human being. Speaking on the endless transformation of the 10,000 things, Atwill invites listeners into the true wonder that appears when our fixed views, rigid opinions, and judgments start to give way.
So I want to talk about the transformation of things. And in the Chuang-Tzu, in that first, when we started off the session, you started with that passage. Once Chuang-Tzu dreamt he was a butterfly flitting and fluttering around, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. So that's sort of the state we hope to get to with our meditation. We want to be happy with ourselves and flitting about and be regarded in the way a butterfly is. That sort of might be the goal some of you might be placing in your mind. He didn't know he was Chuang-Tzu. Suddenly he woke up and there he was, solid and unmistakable Chuang-Tzu. And this is happening every moment we wake up and suddenly we're this. But he didn't know if he was Chuang-Tzu who had dreamt he was a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming he was Chuang-Tzu. Between Chuang-Tzu and a butterfly, there must be some distinction. So right there you're in the mind that wants to know this and that, dividing things. This is called the transformation of things. And it was only recently, almost in my entire life, in my imagination, when I thought of the chrysalis, I actually used to raise butterflies with my daughter. We would go and collect the little baby caterpillars of the swallowtails up in the mountains in Santa Barbara and raise them until they formed the chrysalis. And in my imagination, I saw them just growing some wings, on the body of the caterpillar. But I found out recently that they actually, in the chrysalis, the entire body, all the internal organs, the brain, everything liquefies. And it becomes this soluble solution. So that's the transformation of things. The transformation of things is a dissolving of the former solid nouns, the liver, the heart, the brain, the me, my marriage, my history, whatever it was. And dissolving in the solution, and then the transformation is possible without bringing all those solid pieces with me. And so I want to talk a little bit about the aligning with the transformation of things. How do we do that? And actually that's sort of the heart of the practice. How is it that we align with the natural flow of things and things becoming one thing and turning into another? And the main thing we do is to oppose this, and we think we're aligning with it, is we come up with a plan to align with the transformation of things. And the plan makes some fatal flaws, and the first one is that somehow it's something we have to learn how to do. and then implement it. And that's a hard thing to do. Somehow you have to learn some skills, or you have to deal with your crazy mind, or you have to go back and heal your childhood, and you have to work it out with your mother or your ex-husband, or all of the ways that we come up with a plan to transform our lives. Or we cast that out into the future, and I try to get to something that I want to be in the future, and then I try to move myself, or more frequently, we try to move other people in the direction we think would be good for them to transform, because we have an idea of where the transformation of things should go. And we want to turn them actually into a butterfly, but they had other plans. And there's this great poem by Basho where he says, "Not turning into a butterfly, autumn deepens for the worm." So most of us are married to worms, and or our children are a worm, and we're hoping they're a butterfly, or our history. This is very interesting. We wish to have a different history. We wish we were a different. We had a different life in our past, and we go back and try to. We think we had the wrong life, the wrong history, in order to make it into our future with any kind of ease. And so the first strategy is to come up with some sort of plan in order to make the transformation happen. And there's a lot of struggle involved with that, and there's a lot of pain and effort, and a kind of grinding of internally and externally. You can feel that around you. You're trying to press into the world and change it, or press into myself and change myself. So in the transformation of things, and with Zen, the transformation of things is the nature of reality. So it's already happening. It's not something you need to learn how to do. It's already being done. The whales are migrating. You don't have to worry about them. The stars are appearing every night. You don't have to fix them. Your ex-husband is exactly the way he is, just like Orion in the sky. And if we don't have to then learn how to align and change ourselves, it's simply noticing when we're opposing the transformation. What effort I'm putting into, all the effort I'm making is in opposition to, if it feels like I'm pushing, or the world is pushing and pressing in to me, I'm trying to get into something, that would be a sign that I'm opposing the transformation of things. Yeah, and one of the things that, well, I think I'll wait for this. I'm going to read you now a little story about aligning with the transformation of things. It's from the Chuang Tzu, The Inner Chapters, and it's funny because this is a story that I told a friend a week or so ago, that I was working with her, and I didn't realize that it was from Chuang Tzu. I thought it was a Zen story, from later, and then I realized it was from the material we're teaching, so it seemed good to sort of a nod that would be good to work with it today. And the chapter is called "To Care for This Life," which I think is a beautiful opening note. A kind of, instead of to fix this life, it's to care for this life. And instead of to fix our children, to care. And I'll show you where we get into some trouble with that word care for in a moment. We'll start with Chuang Tzu. A cook was cutting up an ox for Wen Hui, the king of Wei. When his hand probed or his shoulder heaved, when his foot moved or his knee thrust, the flesh whirred and fell away. The blade flashed and hissed, its rhythm centered and ancient. Its rhythm centered and ancient. So the rhythm is already appearing, and you simply listening to the rhythm and following it. And never faltering, like a rainmaker dancing. It's very much like dancing. or an orchestra playing. "Unbelievable," said the king, "a skill so perfected it's unbelievable." The cook put down his knife and replied, "The way is what I care about. And the way goes beyond mere skill." So he's not saying that somehow skill is not involved. He's saying it's beyond that. It will only take you to so far, and you'll come to a place where it's good to have some skill. You need to know how to pick up a knife. When I first began cutting up oxen, I could see nothing but the ox. I could see nothing but my idea of my daughter and what she should be. After 3 years, I could see more than the ox. And now I meet the ox in spirit. I've stopped looking with my eyes. When perception and understanding cease, the spirit moves freely. Trusting the principles of heaven, I send the blade slicing through huge crevices. And you can feel all the space between things. And this is a real thing. Every one of you in this room has had moments in the last few days when you've felt the space between things be so large that it was like there was no resistance in the passage of what was needed or wanted, leading it through huge hollows, keeping my skill constant and essential. I just slipped the blade through, never touching ligament or tendon, let alone bone. An exceptional cook cuts and so needs a new knife every year. You know what that's like. We just feel exhausted, and everyone around us is exhausted. An ordinary cook chops and so needs a new knife every month. Have you ever tried to chop up someone's and you know, get them into what you want them to do? Now I've had this knife for 19 years. It's taken apart thousands of oxen, but it's still sharp, still fresh from the grindstone. There's space in a joint, and the blade has no thickness. That's a beautiful image. The blade has no thickness. Having no thickness, it slips right through. There's plenty of room, more than enough for a blade to wander. That's why, after 19 years, it's still fresh from the grindstone. Even so, I often come up against a knotty place. This is like, so many people have come into the interview room and they've come up against a knotty place where I stop and I study the difficulties. So this is a part of the meditation where it's not always going to be, you won't always find the space. You'll find a part of aligning with the transformation is feeling when there's a stoppage, where a place where something like that's, I feel very much like with depression is like that, where it's a stopping of the consciousness that you can't, it's an honorable moment. It's a beautiful moment, and not to force things when the universe is holding you in a moment where you need to wait. I stop and I study the difficulties, growing timid and cautious. So it doesn't mean you need to always be brave and some sort of samurai. Timidity and caution are sometimes necessary. I focus my vision and work slowly, moving the blade with great delicacy, and suddenly, boom, things come apart, like clumps of dirt falling back to earth. Holding the knife, I stand back and I look all around me, utterly content and satisfied. I think that's a beautiful moment too, that when there's this feeling of inner freedom and space, and we look up and we see we're with the universe, we're with each other, and we're with the redwoods. Then I wipe the blade clean and put it away. "How marvelous," said the king. "I listened to the words of a butcher, and suddenly I've learned how to care for life itself." So I think I want to start with what are some of the impediments to this open, free state. And one of the things about the open, free state is, or the impediments to the transformation of things, is that there's always the person that wants to control the transformation of things is the very impediment. It's actually the definition of an impediment to the transformation of things. This control, the world according to me, the world according to what I think should, could, would be happening, or should, could, would have happened. That is, I guess, effort maybe is another, that's a place where it's a sign that the world in a way is fighting you. And so that's not bad. It's a kind of It's a kind of it's a little bit like the sign of happiness and the blue arrow. It's a little bit of an arrow pointing to where your happiness is, where you're fighting, because it's containing an equal amount of joy, an equal amount of freedom. Wherever you have some intense, especially repetitive constrictional pain or problem in your life, it will be it's not an accident that it's appeared in your life. It has something for you, especially those repetitive difficulties. And it's not necessary to be despairing in a way. It's like a little package wrapped up with your freedom inside of it in the exact shape of the difficulty. And eventually, at some point you may start enjoying or having some not enjoy maybe even enjoying, yes, or having some relish for and interest in those places where the difficulties rise up because there's more life there. There's more freedom possible. And so we want that. We want that. That's why, we want more of that in our life. That's aligning with the transformation of things, is noticing where I'm opposed to the transformation of things. That is aligning. And another way to say this is it's intimacy. Another word for awakening is the old Chan word is intimacy, sort of interchangeable. And that would be intimacy with the whole of my situation, including my own fighting with the situation, my own opposition to my situation. That's a part of my situation, and I can be intimate with that. One of the ways we fight are when we have some sort of agenda for ourselves or other people of where we want them to be. We want them to turn into a butterfly. And this is particularly pernicious if you have a good agenda or a compassionate agenda. Because when you have a good or a compassionate agenda, if we have a selfish agenda, at least there's a little bit of a doubt there already, so that's good. But with your compassionate, good agenda, you're just solidly behind it. You have got all of the reasons why you're right, and there's no question. Certainty is entirely on your side. Even you can quote the scriptures that say why you're so right. And so there's a kind of vigilantism and a kind of zeal that goes with your compassion, which is not experienced that way from the people who are the beneficiaries of it. And a couple people told me some great stories, like, someone came in and said that her her stepson and her partner, their whole family has trouble with money, and they have a whole history of, getting large amounts of money and then squandering it, and this is sort of their karmic shadow is money, getting bunches of money, and then suddenly the house is gone and the car's in hock and etc. And this person said that something she's really good at is financial planning. And so she thought it would be really helpful, where this is going, to speak to the stepson, and give him to help him because she could see he was headed towards another one of those kinds of dilemmas. And this is really beautiful because she starts to give him the good advice, and she knows she's right because she thinks she cares about him. But as soon as she starts giving the advice, she sees his face close. And she had enough of a practice to notice that that was happening. She was aligning with the transformation because she was allowing more of what she saw to be there. And so she didn't press further with that. And it was that moment when the knife hits the gristle and she just waits and feels it. And then she saw, we don't cut here, we wait. And then later, that same or a different stepson, I can't remember, they both have financial problems. One of them they get this phone call, and he's at the car dealer, and he wants to buy a car, but his credit's been refused, and he wants to be an Uber driver to just help him get by, but his credit's been refused, so would they please co-sign? Here's an opportunity to really be helpful if she wants to be helpful. And she had this, there's a strong compulsion to leap out and try to help because they wanted to be good parents or helpful parents. But to wait, again, that was a moment where you just wait and feel. She could feel there was what she was afraid of. She slowed down enough to notice what she was afraid of. She was afraid that if she said no, she would think that she was a bad mother. And in fact, this was evidence that she was a bad mother, that her son was calling and needing help. And she also didn't want to feel what she felt if he threw a fit. But all of this was in the guise of the kind of garment of being good or nice or kind. So we'll have some idea about our situation instead of that would be we live in our idea about our situation, our assessment of our situation, instead of entering the situation itself. An example would be, anything you think is a problem that shouldn't be happening. So in the last 24 hours, you probably had something that you were wandering through where you thought they shouldn't be doing this way, or this shouldn't be happening. And just bring that to mind. And you can see how immediately you go and you start living inside this world where you're coming up with all the reasons why it shouldn't be happening. And you're coming up with reasons how to fix it. And you're maybe even making a plan to go to someone and make them fix it. So that's living in our assessment, our idea about something, instead of being in the transformation of things, which is, I'm here feeling incredibly annoyed. I'm judging the situation. My mind is coming up with all of these thoughts, but not living inside of it and thinking I have to go with it, but staying awake inside of all of it, opening out and including more and more. You don't need to curate your mind or your feelings. The ones that are appearing are an expression of the transformation of things. And they want something. They're trying to transform something. And me going outside and condemning what's happening and refusing to enter the moment I'm in is a refusal of my awakening. It's a refusal of my transformation to go back and live up here. And it's also, you'll notice, if I continue to live up here, then there becomes an aggression where then I'm justified in going and pressing in on other people. And it's not that you don't respond to, if a snake is lying on the road and see a car coming, to just shoo it away so it doesn't get run over. That's responding to, that's moving the knife. But if I stand back and I condemn all those terrible people who drive cars so fast and they shouldn't be doing this, and when they do, they know there's snakes there, and that's resisting the transformation of things. Another thing we do is we come up with a plan. As someone told me this beautiful story, and you can see that kind of extracts some of the life out of things. Who's someone who's a sculptor who said that, who works in stone, and he said when he first started working, he used to come up with an idea that he wanted to make a sculpture of, and he would make a little maquette in clay of the piece that he wanted to do first, and then he would just take the stone and he'd just make the piece, like that. And he said after a while, he stopped doing that. That somehow there was some he was almost like had made himself an indentured servant to the maquette. And that's often what we do. We think we know what we want our marriage to look like or etc. And we just chip away at them until they look like the maquette. Instead of feeling with the knife, what's wanted. Where is there an open space? Where is there space? Where do I need to wait? The other thing you can look for that you'll notice is this is one of the primary diagnostics of suffering in the Buddhist sense is a loss of connection, a severing of connection. And one of the primary ways we do that is with our disapproval of and condemnation of something, the blame or a defensiveness is a kind of stepping back or an attacking. The other thing you'll notice, there's often a feeling of urgency, like it's got to be done right now. Like I've got to get, I don't know. They have to, they've got to make people wear shoes. I'm going to call the health department right now. No, and no. And it's that when you feel that feeling of compulsion that it's got to be now, that's also another sign to look for. The other thing to look for is if you start recruiting other people, either in your mind, this often happens in the mind, especially in the meditation hall, you'll just be like coming up with all the reasons why you're right. And maybe even you'll be telling people in your mind why you're right, or you might go the opposite way. All the reasons why I'm wrong. And I'll be coming up with all the lists of why I'm wrong and I don't belong here and I'll never get it. And everyone else is getting it. Look at that person that looks so happy. And, it's clearly, I'll never be like that. Here I am. I'm just trying to hold it together so I don't start crying in the Zendo. And the attack goes, the blame goes inwardly. So the recruitment for the fixed view and identity, I'm a this, I'm a bad person, or you're a bad person, or even you're a good person. It can go the opposite direction too. It can be a kind of inflation where I'm an important person. I'm someone I have a PhD, or I'm a Roshi, and then I claim this as my identity, that I am this. I'm a this, a solid thing that's not fluid, that's fixed. I'm a noun. And what that does, as soon as I claim this sort of territory that's not moving in the universe as important, and it's me, then immediately what that does is it severs my connection with everyone I've ranked as less important in that system. And that person can feel it. If you ever are with someone and you find yourself claiming something that is my family came over on the Mayflower or something to try to impress someone with claim some importance. You can see it's like when the woman came in, talked to her son, giving him help. You can see the doors like closing. You can see yourself making the gristle. Like that's making karma. That's like making a thickness in the universe. So an impediment for the natural flow of the transformation gets hardened with that. The other thing is it's repetitive. Often it's repetitive. You may, whenever you come to a retreat, you may always just, you have something about this is me, the lighting in the Zendo. This is always gets me. Like I always have all kinds of feelings about the lighting in the Zendo. It's got to be candlelight. It's got to be dark. And I can start making demands and, bullying people and making people feel bad. And now that I'm a Roshi, I have the right to do that. It was harder to work that one out when I was just a student. So you'll notice a kind of repetition of patterns or you always feel at some point in the retreat a kind of desolation and separateness and aloneness that's actually, you feel that you cannot bear it and you have to leave. Or a feeling of shame or of loneliness that you feel like if I sit here on my cushion and experience this, it will annihilate me. That it feels so strong. And I mean, those are the moments when it's so beautiful to have a practice in a Sangha that holds you when you can't quite hold yourself. And yeah, so I'll just stay there. The other thing you'll notice is the physicality of the blockage. You'll feel it like your own body will become like the gristle. You'll notice, as this is especially true with interactions with other people, that they'll be like someone will just look at you a certain way, or someone that you thought was your friend walks by and they don't acknowledge you, and the mind goes and grasps it to mean something about me. It means something about me, and I'm making a solid someone that's not in the transformation of things. I'm claiming it as a solid identity that's not changing. And so you'll notice your mind doing that, going out and or things just rise up seemingly out of the ground, and suddenly a sorrow will rise up. But with the constriction, there's a hardening of the heart. I really experience it in the heart region when I'm holding something off, where the heart gets very like there's almost like some concrete or something that gets or a lead blanket or something that gets built up between me and the world, and a feeling of being masked and also invisible, that I'm I'm not the world can't see me, or I can't get to the world, or I can look at the world, but I can't get into it, and the feeling of being isolated. The other thing you'll notice is a universal lack of a sense of humor around your problem. No more to say about that one. Another thing to look for is if other people need to tiptoe around a certain something when they're near you, a certain issue, you can't bring something up. You can't talk about global warming around, your brother-in-law, because they just immediately it's like some sort of nuclear explosion or something. So that's a clue if you start for other people, but it's the work's always here. And if you notice that in someone, right then the possibility is you could be the cook. You could, what does it feel like to be in this place in the Ox where there's like you've come to some sort of gunpowder? What do you do? And the other thing we do is we go out and look for evidence for why the fixed view is true. And we have an implacable resistance and hostility towards anything that would undermine the solidity of our view. Not that any of you would have any of these symptoms coming up this week. So I want to tell you a little story about the transformation of things and that feeling into the moment that I'm in. And when I and it's always feeling in internally. It's an internal there's no internal and external. It's a feeling into the whole of the moment. So last March, I was living in Jenner, and I got a phone call from my sister, Anastasia, who said that it was early in the morning, and she said that our mother had had gotten who's 90, she's now 91. She'd had a kidney infection that had gone septic. And I actually I don't know what that means, but I know it means it's bad. I know it's bad. And that she had gone into emergency room that night and she had almost died. They thought she was gonna die. So, in fact, they still thought she was probably gonna die. She wouldn't make it. And so it'd be good if I wanted to come down. And the first thing was there's, you know, we don't know how we'll feel when anything happens. We think some things will upset us and some things will make us happy and some things will be frightening and actually we don't know. We actually don't know. So we try to arrange our lives so they'll go a certain way so we won't feel certain things. But actually the thing that you thought would be frightening is full of freedom, or the thing you thought you really wanted, when you get it's like tasting cardboard. It's we can't know from here. Our ideas about what we want and how things should go are incredibly suspect. You probably discovered this. Anyway, I get this phone call, and the first thing was the sister that told me is one I've always been. I have 8 brothers and sisters. And this one, I have a sister who's a year older, and I have a sister who's a year younger, and then just like a whole array of sisters and brothers spread out in all directions. And this is the one where I have, who's a year younger, the most feeling of competition with throughout my whole life. And so my immediate, like what came up was I wanted her to think that I was a good daughter, like I was a better daughter than she was. And she was very eager to let me know that she had stayed with mother all night in the emergency room, and she had taken to the emergency room. So here we are, we're having this sort of resistance to, this sort of making a fixed self, or noticing that the fixed self has arisen. I've got a piece of gristle here now in my own self. And if I don't defend against it, if I then don't think this means something about me, here I am, my mother's almost dying, and I'm competing with my sister, that's my response. If I don't disapprove of that and I have it as if it were the sound of the bird call, this is the thing appearing. It doesn't have to do with me. It's just the thing that's here. It doesn't mean I'm a this or a that. It just means this has appeared in my mind. It has something to do with the transformation. And so that was kind of beautiful to see that part of myself. And then I had to make a decision if I wanted to go or not, to fly down or when. And because I wasn't afraid of that part of my mind, I could let it be there. I didn't have to fight it and prove that I wasn't thinking that. And so then immediately make a phone call and fly down, to prove that, just sort of censor that bit of the universe. And then I just waited. I was just like holding the knife, just waiting, seeing, what does the situation want? What the whole of it, including me. And I just waited until that was clear. that I wanted to go. And me going didn't have to do with then me proving that I was a good daughter, which in a way was in the way of my love for my mother, my actual love for my mother. It was an impediment between being able to experience that by putting that kind of wedge in between us of this thick material of my idea about what I want her to think about me, because I'm afraid that, that I'm not that. So I fly down. My mother's in the hospital, and she just goes through this harrowing medical odyssey, which any of you, if you've ever had older relatives or parents, and or maybe yourself have been in the hospital for a while. She was there for about a month, and she almost died 3 times. So we had various things going on, siblings coming in, and I started to just notice my mind. There's a lot of time just to meditate, just sit there, because there's a lot of just nothing to do in a hospital. It's great. And I'm sitting there, she's hooked up with, like, all these machines and wires and everything, and every it seems like every 10 minutes, someone's coming in to check on her. It's like she's finally falls asleep and someone comes in and they poke her or wake her up, and she's just getting more and more rattled and, unhealthy, actually, from all of she can't heal. And every person that comes in, this is really beautiful. I began to see how the effect of a human being who is a healer, they're medical people, they'd come in, and just from the sound of their footsteps and the way they opened the door, my mother became incredibly sensitive to a fixed view, the aggression of being helpful in someone. That if they came in with an agenda or a plan for her, that it would be as if they had struck her physically. I could see the kind of blow that that was to her physicality. And so they would, if someone would open the door with that kind of some energy, she would already be injured by it before they even did anything to her. And then some people would come in with a kind of that they were with her. That's the other thing. The people who came in with an agenda were with the agenda, and they hardly glanced at my mother, and they hardly looked at her, and they weren't with her at all. They were with the blood pressure thing or like that. And one woman came in who was, they also kept having all these different doctors and nurses. Everyone that came in, they'd put her on different floors, and she different. And every crew that would come in, they'd have a different diagnosis, and they'd have a different what to do about it. And it was always changing. And all of my siblings had ideas also about what should be done and shouldn't be done. So there was like these just cacophony of agendas for my mother. And eventually it was kind of like all the gods out here in the yard, that you start to see that no one really knows. It's like it's just Hanuman appearing. We thought it was the night nurse, and it's Hanuman, or now it's the cobra snake, or it's and the other thing was really wonderful to see is that often when someone would come in and they'd say something like, we would like to give her some sort of medication, and they'd say a name that I didn't know what it was, and immediately my mind would have an opinion. We shouldn't be giving her this, or we should be giving her this. And I had no idea what they were even giving her. But it was phenomenal to see how quickly the mind will go to a position and start to defend it and leave the transformation, because we somehow want to know things. And in a way, it's so that we don't have to bear the uncertainty of not knowing where the knife is going to move, not having a plan for how this will go, not knowing what will happen, not knowing if we will give her the right or wrong medication, not knowing anything, that all of that. And then There was a couple of comedic moments. Um, one one of the times she almost died, she had internal bleeding, so she was bleeding from everywhere, and her, I guess, pressure dropped. Is that what happens when you bleed? So they said, "Well, she's likely going to die this time for sure." And so they wheel her off and they take her into surgery, and they say, "Prepare yourself, 'cause she's probably not gonna make it." And I didn't happen to be at the hospital this time. We were doing shifts, and 2 of my sisters were there, and they just wait and wait and wait, and they say, "It's not gonna take that long," but it ends up taking, like, they're gone for, like, a couple of hours, and finally, the surgeon comes into the waiting room, and he looks very grave, and he says, "Would you like me about to tell you this news here?" And there was a lot of people in the waiting room, "Or out in a more private place?" And my sister said, "Let's go to a private place." So they're thinking he's gonna tell her that she died from his manner. And then he goes into a very slow and meticulous description of the surgery. And he's just going on and on and on and on, and my sisters are going, and finally, when my sister said, "Is she alive?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't tell you? Yeah, she's fine." So there he was being, showing what a good surgeon and a methodical surgeon he was, but he'd forgotten that, their main concern was not that, but whether she was alive. And then all of my sisters and brothers had agendas about how my mother should be treated too. So I have this one sister, the oldest one, who she's very devoutly Catholic. And in her mind, my mother is bound for hell, for sure. So to help my mother, she says she's sending a priest to give her the last rites. And if you know my mother, this would be she'd almost stay alive just to say, give him her view on Catholicism. So, and she assures us that our mother that years ago she had asked our mother if she was ever dying, if it would be okay if she would send a priest to do the last rites and take confession. And my mother and she tells us, and mother said, "Oh, sure, that'd be fine." So she took this as a yes, and really it was my mother's sarcasm. So my other sister, who also rankles against any sort of religion, she has sort of the opposite view. It's her time to watch my mother, and my sister, she finds out he's on the way, and she's saying, "No, don't send him. Mother wouldn't like this." Really upset her, and she says, "Well, he's on the way. He's already on the way." It's like 11 o'clock at night in the hospital. So my sister's thinking, "I'm not going to let him in the room. This would kill our mother." So she goes out into the hall, and it was the long hospital hallways, and she sees this priest, like, way down the hallway dressed all in black, and she says in her mind, she's sizing him up, thinking, "Can I take him down?" He's shuffling towards her. He's like 159 years old. He came over on, the Irish potato famine or something. He's like 4'7". He's got little tufts, whiffs of hair. My sister starts explaining the problem to him. She said, I'm so sorry. I have this older sister. She was mistaken about this, and she thinks my mother's gonna go to hell if you don't do this." And he says, "Well, we're all God's children, and I'm sure your mother is in God's loving care, and she'll be blessed by God's love, and she'll go into the heavenly realms." It's really an amazing thing. So the blessing, in a way, was sent supposedly from my mother, but my sister got the blessing. Yeah. And he said, "Could I just go in? I understand. I'll just say a blessing." And my sister says, "You can't even go into the room." And he says, "Oh, I understand." He said, "We'll do the blessing out here." So he does, chants a prayer and says goodnight. Yeah, a very sweet thing. And and I'll tell one other brief story. I've been talking a long time, but I want to say this one thing about this one night when I felt that my two sisters and I, the one Anastasia, the one that I'm always in competition with, you know, and my other sister who was going to take down the priest. The three of us were. It was my watch for my mother, and I was going to spend the night in the hospital there because she was very close to dying. We didn't want her to be alone. So it was late at night, and her breathing starts to do something very strange, and I look at her face and I see her and I think she's dying. And I don't want to be here alone. And I called my sisters, and both of them came right away. That was the first where I was no longer the me that's stoic and opposed to my sisters and doing it all on my own. For me to ask for help was me moving the knife in the space. There was this big opening there. I could feel the opening in myself and in my sisters. And they arrived, and one of my sisters was at my mother's head and putting washcloths on her face. And my other sister had her hand and was rubbing lotion in her hand. And I was at her feet and rubbing scented lotion into her feet. And then my sister she had this inspiration where she starts playing on her iPhone, the Grand Canyon Suite, which as a child, we used to take ballet lessons and we would perform ballets to the Grand Canyon Suite in our living room and force our mother to watch them. So this music is playing, and my mother suddenly gets the pain leaves her face and her breathing relaxes. And she says, "It's amazing. It's so amazing. I'm so happy. It's amazing." And we became one mind. I would look at my sister and she would stand up and I would know that she was saying, "We'll move." And I would be at the head and she would be at the feet. And then we'd turn to the other sister and she would know, "I need this," or "Let's turn that." And we entered into some kind of grace. And every one of you has had those moments where we're fully where there's just space everywhere. There's nothing but space. And every movement is possible. And everything that's needed is known before I even have to ask. And then this went on for a long time, like we fell out of time as well. And then after a while, we looked at each other and I could see, and my sisters could see, it's dissipating. It's falling away. And then we were out of it. We had moved out of it. And then we had that something, some sort of numinous hours with my mother. So I think that's to say that we know all of the states. We already know how to discover our own awakening. We're discovering it. It's not something we need to learn how to do. It's appearing all the time in its dark form, in its bright form, in its wide, open, spacious form. And there isn't any piece of it that's not your awakening. I want to end with a little poem. This is called The Theory of Memory. Long, long ago, before I was a tormented artist, afflicted with longing, yet incapable of forming durable attachments. Long before this, I was a glorious ruler, uniting all of the divided country. So I was told by the fortune teller who examined my palm. Great things, she said, are ahead of you, or perhaps behind you. It is difficult to be sure. And yet, she added, What is the difference? Right now, you are a child holding hands with a fortune teller. All the rest is hypothesis and dream.
To support these episodes or learn more about upcoming programs and retreats at Pacific Zen Institute, visit us at pacificzen.org. You'll find details on John Tarrant's Sunday Talks, our Open Temple morning meditation, and our Zen Luminary series featuring intimate conversations with scholars, poets, and teachers of Koan Zen. Thanks for listening.